Welcome to RevKevHumanMe. I am obviously your host, Rev Kev, so great to have you here. For those who are tuning in for the first time, this is a standalone episode on Jesus and Dracula, but today's book summary does dovetail roughly into 10 episodes that I downloaded about Jesus facing off and winning against the devil in the wilderness. Jesus' approach against the devil should be a clue how we human creation can fend off temptations. I also want to add that I recently topped 150 subscriptions, and I am so appreciative of all the support along the way. Thank you. I also appreciate all the attention I've received the past 3 months, but I am mostly interested in helping people overcome our internal drive, our addiction to please ourselves. If you haven't already considered subscribing, and if you like, ring the notifications bell next to subscribe to receive all new created material. Friends, I have been talking about dropping this video on Jesus and Dracula for the past, 6 weeks. I hope it meets everyone's expectations. Today we tackle a polarizing topic, the novel Dracula, 1897. As mentioned earlier, I am not here to entertain or tickle ears. We find ourselves in a spiritual fog within our country. Bram Stoker said about the same in his novel Dracula. My good friend Bill mentions to me that the word novel gets its meaning from the word novella or novelty, something new and entertaining. Bram Stoker brought something novella to the world, but it wasn't merely entertainment. I'm not bringing something novella, something new. I'm not being ingenious here, but rather talking about something old and tried. I'm bringing something to the forefront that maybe didn't catch. I'm not sure why. But I believe Stoker's vision will help explain some of the brain fog in our church and country today. As far as the character Dracula goes, well, he's a thrill a minute. We did a poll among 100 adults about vampires and Dracula in general, and they were to pick the best answer. A, good, B, redeemable, C, misunderstood, D, evil, E, all of the above, F, none of the above. The top answers were vampires, Dracula are misunderstood, 33%, and evil, 33%. So over 50 of 100 people polled were actually sympathetic or empathetic to the idea of vampires in general. I'm not going to break it all down for you, but I will show you that Bram Stoker was not sympathetic or empathetic to the idea of vampires whatsoever. He saw them as pure evil, the devil incarnate. Yes, Stoker paralleled Dracula to the devil. So now we are moving into this why I created the video in the first place. Well, as explored just a few episodes ago, Stoker may be the only person in the past 2,000 years to quote the devil from Matthew chapter 4, verse 8 and 9. Again, the devil took Jesus to a high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And the devil said to Jesus, all these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. Verse 9 is word for word verbatim in Dracula the novel, 1897. It's not there by fluke. And I will argue that Stoker's novel Dracula is largely mistaken today because we assume and look past the original novel. And I will demonstrate that Stoker knowingly used a fantasy story to convey an orthodox Christian message. And I will explain why the warning about the devil is so important. And at the end of the day, everyone will make up their own mind what is and what isn't important. Friends, about 10 years ago I was asked a valid question about Bram Stoker, the novel Dracula. The question was, did Stoker see faith as this, or one superstitious power that fights a contrary one? Is this just another typical good versus evil story with the good people coming out on top after they suffer horribly? Bram Stoker's Wikipedia page is rather vague in details for such a celebrity. Under the subheading, Beliefs and Philosophy, it reads, he, Stoker, had a writer's interest in the occult, notably mesmerism, which is hypnotism, but despised fraud and believed in the superiority of the scientific method over superstition. Like I mentioned, this is, quote, attributed to Wikipedia page, and I'm going to ask you to remember that quote for later. Tuck it away later after we've read some paragraphs from Stoker. There's another quote on the Wikipedia page that struck me as odd. One renowned researcher in the study of Dracula, a professor named Elizabeth Miller, calls Dracula a vampire protagonist. Let me ask you, has the meaning of protagonist and antagonist changed that much in 40 years since I was in grade school? Okay, clearly Dracula is a main character in a novel named after him, but antagonists can also be main characters in a story. Unless something has changed, the protagonist is the character that drives the story forwards, while the antagonist is the character or force that opposes the protagonist, acting as the main adversary. This is the bedrock of storytelling, is it not? Aren't protagonist and antagonist at the polar opposite stream? So again, while Dracula is a main character in the novel Dracula, he cannot also be the protagonist because he certainly opposes all the heroes. He attempts to feed on all England for eternity. So why am I bringing this question up at all? Well, as you saw from my recent polls themselves, 50% of people polled were sympathetic and even empathetic towards vampires. Vampires and vampirism has evolved over the past 40 years. Today's generation sees vampires as protagonist figures. Books such as I Am Legend, Fever Dream, The Historian, Dracula in Love, Thirst, Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice. These books romanticize the vampire character. What about films? Well, where do I start? Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1992, Dracula Untold. Interview with the Vampire with Tom Cruise, Blade, Let the Right One In, Only Lovers Left Alive, and The Lost Boys. The movie The Lost Boys, 1987, it's credited with helping to assimilate tall and thin humped-backed, black-cloaked vampires into the modern day. Crafty creators shifted the vampire's dirty, dark, brooding reputation into a sexier, youthful appeal. Yes, Dracula vampires got a makeover so that they would be more appealing, which laid the runway for smash hits like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, 1992, and the hit book series Twilight, 2005 to 2008, and thereafter the Twilight TV spin-offs on film and TV. Wikipedia, which is not always perfect, states, Dracula is one of the most famous works in English literature, and the titillating character of Count Dracula has been adapted more times than any fictional figure. Following its publication, there have been more than 700 adaptations of the novel Dracula across virtually all forms of media. The book also established Stoker's reputation as one of the most acclaimed writers of Gothic horror fiction. It would be hard to argue with Wikipedia on these last points. And I apologize, but I have to always mention the 1897 novel Dracula separate from the 1992 movie Bram Stoker's Dracula, because that's what so many of you are thinking about, the movie. The book and the movie are vastly different, yet they share the same names, Bram Stoker and Dracula. Bram Stoker did not trivialize or romanticize the dark figure in his novel Dracula 1897. The recent poll of 100 people suggested that significant numbers of people believe vampires are victims or are misunderstood. It is interesting to me, to say the least. According to my reading, some see Dracula 1897 as a Gothic horror story that glorifies Dracula, while others saw the very same book as a Christian tract. A Christian tract? It can't be both. Here is one summary about the book that I unearthed. The folk legends and traditions Van Helsing draws upon suggest that the most effective weapons in combating supernatural evil were symbols of unearthly good indeed. In the fight against Dracula, these symbols of good take the form of the icons of Christian faith, such as the crucifix. The novel Dracula, 1897, is so invested in the strength and power of these Christian symbols that it reads, at times, like a propagandist Christian promise of salvation. Dracula, a horror that glorifies evil, or a Christian tract? Can it be both? Let's take a look. Stoker was born in 1847. He married his wife Florence in 1878. Stoker himself passes away in 1912. Listen carefully. Let me explain. Take a deep breath. The Protestant Reformation is born 1517 to 1687. The Scientific Revolution is born 1543 to 1815, a revolution that leads into the Enlightenment period 1685 to 1815. Francis Bacon is long considered the father of the scientific revolution. He demonstrated an incompatibility between faith and reason, or science. The scientific revolution stressed research, the collection of empirical data and evidence through observation. It was not an accident that Francis Bacon laid a foundation for society to challenge the belief in God, in the authority of the church, and all things supernatural. Of course, we know that there were scientists, even after the Enlightenment period, who disagreed with Francis Bacon. They believed that faith and science to be completely compatible. Keep in mind that Stoker was born in the fumes of the Enlightenment period, the 1840s and 1850s. And I will argue that Stoker knew what he was doing when he dressed up his novel in the ineffectiveness of science and reason to tackle the brooding riddle of evil. The answer to the ineffectiveness of reason against evil is then teased out through faith and tradition. It is by no coincidence that Stoker's novel is chapter after chapter, page after page, charting, that is, research entries, and then personal journal entries of the heroes and heroines. In chapter 17, Stoker's main hero, Dr. Abraham Van Helsing, warns his former star pupil, Dr. Stewart, that to rid of the earth of this monster, we must all have the knowledge and help we can muster. Meaning, all the knowledge. All the knowledge, notably faith, tradition, and religion. It is the fault of our science, Van Helsing states, that is, it wants to explain it all, and if not explain not, then it says there's nothing to explain. Understand Stoker's English is a tongue twister for simple me. In page 242, Helsing teaches, all we have to go upon are traditions and superstitions. These at first do not appear much. When the matter is one of life and death, nay, of even more than either life or death, yet must we be satisfied in the first place, because we have to be. No other means is at our control. And secondly, because after all, these things, tradition and superstition, are everything. Does not the belief in vampires rest for others, though not, alas, for us, on them? A year ago, which of us would have received such a possibility in the midst of our scientific matter-of-fact 19th century? We have scouted a belief that we saw justified under our very eyes. Take it, then, the vampire, and the belief in his limitations and his cure, rest for the moment on the same basis. And so Van Helsing is speaking up about scientific theory and faith. Stoker pulls the curtain back. If the heroes don't have faith in religion and tradition to fall back on, they are all screwed. They will all die or become vampires themselves. They are powerless without faith. And so we continue on page 242. Stoker takes a direct run at the scientific theory and the Enlightenment period, the belief system. This is Stoker. He's going to go run up and down page after page, front to back of the novel. Stoker is going to introduce a spiritual force that is beyond scientific comprehension, and Stoker is going to share a cure. Not invent a cure, he's going to share a cure. He tells his audience through the medium of story that something very dark exists in this fantasy world. It's a warning that something dark exists in our actual world. Stoker is taking aim about the limitations of science and the scientific revolution, and don't just take my word for it, read the book. It's by no coincidence Stoker's hero and Dracula are scientists. Scientists who were taught to observe and record data, but dismiss the supernatural altogether. It's all there in plain right for the reader. Dr. Abraham Van Helsing saves the day by inquiring of faith, tradition, and religion. Maybe you've already made the connection, but Bram is also short for Abraham. I don't think it's a coincidence that Stoker's first name is Abraham. Let's be clear. Stoker also had an appeal for science, but never at the expense of his faith in God. Let's look at Stoker's character development for a few minutes. Dr. Abraham Van Helsing, Dutch professor. Described by his former pupil, Dr. Seward, as a philosopher and metaphysician, and one of the most advanced scientists of his day. Van Helsing explains to the fellowship. He says, the vampire, the Nosferatu, do not die like the bee when they are stung once. For he is only stronger, and being stronger, have yet more powerful to work evil. Van Helsing explains to the group that unlike the creatures of nature, vampires are supernatural. The cause and effect renders the strongest forces of good weak against the vampire, and Van Helsing adjusts away from science and reason towards religion and tradition. Dr. Seward is the administrator and lead doctor at this insane asylum. Dr. Seward leaves observations and charting on his most peculiar patient, Renfield. On page 112, it says, Renfield, the quirky patient, says, I am here to do your bidding, master. I am your slave, and you will reward me, for I shall be faithful. I have worshipped you long and afar off now. Now that you are near, I await your commands, and you will not pass me by. Will you, dear master, in your distribution of good things? And Seward charts. He, Renfield, is a selfish old beggar. Anyhow, he thinks of the loaves and fishes even when he believes he is in a real presence. His, that is, Renfield's manias, make a startling combination. When we closed in on him, he fought like a tiger. He is immensely strong, and he was more like a wild beast than a man. I never saw a lunatic in such paroxysm of rage before, and I hope I shall not again. And Dr. Seward is a physician, so we presume highly educated. Dr. Seward is well trained in observation. He charts his patient throughout the book. His most peculiar patient, Renfield, is the reason he calls for his mentor, Dr. Helsing, in the first place. And throughout the book, Dr. Seward conducts and charts his interviews, some verbatim. Dr. Seward's lead patient, Renfield, is observed, trapping small creatures, spiders, flies, and eating them at will. It takes a few 100 pages, but the reader becomes aware that Renfield is hiding his servitude to Count Dracula. And Seward, a leading protagonist, also has eyes for a young gal named Lucy. Apparently all the men in his novel have eyes for Lucy. The love interest of many of the heroes, a flirtatious young lady named Lucy, she becomes the victim of the Count, and she becomes an actual vampire. Stoker does not mean it to be pleasant. It's not romance. So Dracula doesn't just kill Lucy, he milks her of her blood so she can barely stand, and over time she passes into the dead, undead stage. In the fiction, Lucy is an actual dead and undead soul preying on, feeding on children in the night, and the fellowship of heroes restore her to Christ, but not before she is already dead undead. The tradition to restore her soul to her body that she can have life in the general resurrection of Christ is gruesome. The heroes behead her. This is all in the book. Let me tell you about another one of Stoker's characters, Lucy's friend, Mina Harker. Well, if Lucy is the haughty scarlet flirt, then Mina is the prude Christian. In the novel, Mina kisses Lucy. The novel is not expressly interested in sex, but the novel itself is sensual. Mina's kiss was not explicitly on Lucy's lips. The book reads, "She put her arms around her and kissed her. The act of a woman kissing a woman can convey intimacy and care." Mina was concerned about Lucy's deteriorating health and her sleepwalking. But let's be frank, in the sexual hyper age that we live in today, people might take this to mean something other. But human beings, we take something innocent and we soil it. But in the novel, these women have a detailed journal back and forth, journal entries, because they are close friends. One young lady, a Christian conservative by nature, and the other a vixen. But Stoker does not discriminate. It won't shock you to know that Mina also falls for the Count. He seduces her. She too is slowly becoming a dead, undead soul to walk the earth. But the heroes wake up to the grave reality of the situation. The readers are drawn into Mina's pitfall. On page 262, Mina explains, "The mist grew thicker, and I could see it like a smoke, or with white energy of boiling water. Not through the window, but through the joining door. It got thicker and thicker, till it seemed as if I got concentrated in a sort of pillar of cloud in the room, through the top of which I could see the light of gas shining like a red eye. Things began to whirl through my brain just as the cloudy column was now whirling in the room. And through it came the scriptural words, a pillar of cloud by day and a fire by night." Mina continues, "Was it indeed such a spiritual guidance that was coming to me in my sleep? But the pillar was composed of both day and night, guiding for the fire in the red eye, which at the thought got a new fascination for me, till, as I looked, the fire divided and seemed to shine on me through the fog like two red eyes." Such as Lucy told me of in her momentary mental wandering, when on the cliff the dying sunlight struck the windows of St. Mary's Church. And in my dream I must have fainted, for all became black darkness. The last conscious effort which imagination made was to show me a livid, white face bending over me out of the midst. Mina continues, "I must be careful of such dreams, for they would unseat one's reason if there were too much of them. I must be careful of such dreams, for they would unseat one's reason if there were too much of them." And Stoker takes us back through his character Mina. He takes us back to the scientific revolution and enlightenment, questioning any sort of spiritual force within the world. And in page 297, it says, "Now let me guard yourself on your forehead. I touched this piece of sacred wafer in the name of the Father, the Son, and there was a fearful scream which almost froze our hearts to hear. And as he, Van Helsing, had placed the wafer on Mina's forehead, it had seared it, had burned into the flesh as though it had been a piece of white-hot metal. Mina screamed, 'Unclean! Even the Almighty shuns my polluted flesh. I must bear this mark of shame upon my forehead until the judgment day.'" Stoker wants his readers to know that, like Lucy, her friend, the two women are saved by Christ.
We may not like Stoker's choice of literary style, his mechanism, but what the author is telling the reader is that these women's souls are saved by Jesus Christ, a Christ who is the host. Christ's flesh is the sacred wafer. So yes, without question, Stoker introduces the cure to the readership. That's right, the host introduces Jesus Christ. I mean, how many Gothic authors, horror authors, have Jesus Christ as the cure, the hero in the plot? Not many. So what of the host? The sacred wafer plays the most pivotal role in the whole story. The wafer is Christ. The communion wafer is the sacrament, the flesh of Christ, the very presence of Jesus Christ. Dracula has to back down, take a back seat to the host. Dracula must defer to Christ. It's right there in the print over and over again, like on page 284. It reads, "His eyes flamed red with the devilish passion. The great nostrils of the white aquiline nose opened wide and quivered at the edge, and the white sharp teeth behind the full lips of the blood, dripping mouth, champed together like those of a wild beast. With a wrench which threw his victim back upon the bed as though hurled from a height, he turned and sprang at us. But by this time the professor had gained his feet and was holding towards him the envelope which contained the sacred wafer. The count suddenly stopped, just as poor Lucy had done outside the tomb, and cowered back. Further and further back he cowered as we lifting our crucifixes we advanced. The host, my friends, is the cure for the dreadful beast." And then it says in page 299, and it says, "And now, my friends, we have a duty here to do. We must sterilize this earth, so sacred of holy memories that he has brought from a far distant, and for such fell use. He has chosen this earth because it has been holy at one point. Thus we must defeat him with his own weapon, for we make it more holy still. It was sanctified to such use of man. Now he sanctified to God as he spoke. He took from his bag a screwdriver and a wrench, and very soon the top of one of the cases was thrown open, but smelled musty and close. But we did not somehow seem to mind, for our attention was concentrated on the professor. Taking from his box a piece of the sacred wafer, he laid it reverently on the earth, and then shutting down the lid began to screw it home, we aiding him as he worked." Friends, the earth box with this lid is the vampire's bed. The host is the cure. It's spilled, it's crumbed wafer placed upon the earth, and the earth box, it becomes unusable to the vampire. There, in the story, there were 50 earth boxes in total. And so the heroes have to go and find them and discover them, all those hiding places, and sprinkle the wafer into each one. Stoker makes it clear, everything defers to the host. Everything. Friends, long before The Lord of the Rings and J.R. Tolkien, there was Stoker's Fellowship of the Saints in 1897. And we read about their steps throughout this book, the novel. And on page 299 it says, "Till then we bear our cross, as his Son did in obedience to his will. It may be that we are chosen instruments of his good pleasure, and that we assent to his bidding. As that other through stripes and shame, through tears and blood, your doubts and fear, and all that makes a difference between God and man." And there was hope in his words, these were Van Helsing's words, and comfort, and they made for resignation. Mina and I both felt so, and simultaneously we each took one of the old man's hands and bent over and kissed it. Then without a word, we all knelt down together, and all holding hands swore to be true to each other. We men pledged ourselves to raise the veil of sorrow from the head of her whom, each in his own way, we loved, and we prayed for help and guidance in the terrible task which lay before us. So we are clear. What the fellowship is talking about in the last paragraph is the fellowship had to take Lucy's head off her neck. They did this so she wouldn't reawaken and be a dead, undead vampire biting down on the children. Lucy was already dead, but in Stoker's fiction, her soul is with Dracula. So the fellowship reclaimed Lucy's soul for Christ when they lopped her head off. I want to talk a little bit more about the earth boxes and the host. So on page 300 it says, "One by one we treated in the same way each of the great boxes and left them as we had found them to all appearance, but in each was a portion of the host. And when we closed the door behind us, the professor did say solemnly, 'So much is already done. It may be that we, with all the others, that we can be so successful. Then the sunset of this evening may shine on Madame Mina's forehead, all white ivory and with no stain.'" Stoker does not mention whether the wafer had a cross pressed into it or not, but it would make sense if it did. But Mina states late on the final stages of the book, As the fellowship is tracking down this Dracula, she says in page 358, "We shall soon be off. I'm afraid to think what may happen to us. We are truly in the hands of God. He alone knows what may be. And I pray him with all the strength of my sad and humble soul that he will watch over my beloved husband, that whatever may happen." I want to tell you people, I lost count of the times within the novel that I read the phrase, "God's will be done," and the line, "We are in God's hands." And I can certainly understand why some think that Stoker is trying to convert them to Christianity. Let's take a moment and look at the author's depiction of Dracula himself. No doubt Dracula is the main culprit, the fiend, the evil incarnate. There's nothing sensual about him. For me, Dracula gives off a sweaty stench. I mean, he even has hairy palms. Dracula is a perversion. Everything about him is perversion. His consumption of blood is a direct offense to God, who declared the life is in the blood, and it's mine, saith the Lord, right? Paraphrasing Leviticus chapter 17. And Stoker knows what he is writing about. It wasn't some coincidence, some fluke that he chose to write about the sacredness of the blood. The cure is the blood, the flesh and the blood of Christ. It is the cure for sin and the devil. In Stoker's fiction, the Dracula is the devil. Those bound by the Count's curse are bound to him. They are bound to an eternal physical life with no soul. They sleep in the day and feed on blood at night. Dracula is a dark, dark foe. And as I just mentioned a few episodes ago in episode 23, How to Be Human, I talked a bit about how I discovered that Stoker writes the line from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 4, verse 8 and 9, direct word for word in his novel. I can't find this line, the devil used verbatim on Jesus, in any other literature. The quote goes back 2,000 years. What are the chances? It's odd. So in Matthew 4, verse 8 and 9, it says, "The devil took Jesus to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And the devil said to Jesus, 'All these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me.' Then Jesus said to him, 'Be gone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only.'" The phrase, "all these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me," if there is any other occurrence of this phrase, "all these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me," if there are more occurrences in other literature, please leave it in the comments. The Bible phrase, "all these things I will give you if you will just fall down and worship me," is, in my understanding, only found in this fictitious work by Stoker, 1897. In the novel Dracula, the patient Renfield was tempted by Count Dracula to make the Count his lord. Renfield failed to appropriate the words that Jesus taught us. Renfield gives himself over to Satan, and in Stoker's view, it is not a pretty sight. There is no romance. It isn't glamorous. In Matthew 4, verse 10, Jesus said to the devil, "Be gone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only." But Stoker writes that Renfield serves up his soul. Friends, it isn't any coincidence. Stoker is putting Dracula and the devil together for the audience. But society has lost the plot on Stoker's novel because Hollywood and its moguls know that people are misguided. They know people are largely myopic in nature. That simply means that they prefer entertainment and the thrill of tunnel vision over common sense values and deep understanding. In my opinion, Bram Stoker is the guide. He is morphing into the character of Abraham Van Helsing, and he is leading his people, his readership, to the truth. In my honest opinion, the author and guide are one and the same. In my honest assessment, Stoker is inviting the readership to revisit the cross, the sacraments, the host, the wafer, the body of Christ, and the blood, the fellowship of the saints. And I know the video is long and tedious, and I apologize for that, but I just can't finish the summary without mentioning the wolves. On page 243, we read that Dracula can transform himself into a wolf, as we gather from this ship arrival in Whitby when he tears open the dog. So we see him also that he can transform into a bat. The wolves, though, are highlighted by Stoker over and over again. I lost count at around 25 references to the wolves howling at Dracula's behest. Of note, again, Dracula shape shifts into various creatures, but on one occasion he takes the shape of a wolf. It is possible that in Stoker's Dracula, the wolf represents primal, predatory instincts, and Dracula shifting into the wolf creature reflects Dracula's loss of humanity. As mentioned in some of my earlier movies about Wotayako, sometimes written as Wendigo, this is an oral tradition described by the Cree and Algonquin indigenous elders as a parasitic virus. But not small, monstrous in size and scope. The Wotayako picture of spiritual sickness is provided as a scornful beast with human and animal features. Symbolizing its loss of humanity, it cannibalizes and brings spiritual corruption to humanity and all other parts of God's creation. Wendigo, Wedico, voodoo, vampires, it's all the same. It's the same devil. It's the same Satan. And the Bible says that his days are short in Revelation chapter 12, verse 2. Stoker believed in the God of the Bible and his son, Jesus Christ. And we may not be big fans of the way Stoker chose to show the world, but science and scientific theory have a place in the world, but always second to the Lord of Lords. And as I wind down, I remember the quote from C.S. Lewis: people tend to make two mistakes in considering demons and demonic activity. Either they discount and think nothing of it, or they become too fascinated and too preoccupied by it. Find balance, and we will have found the Lord. The Lord is not a crazed lunatic. The Lord is balance. The Lord is God, and he exists. Ergo, scientific theory is always downwind of creation. Secular humanism is not human at all. It's secular. It's also blatant sin to say the universe revolves around people. And stop. To be human is to understand that we, like Adam and Eve, created in the image and likeness of God. Creation was first. Then, science studies what was created. This concept was not lost on Stoker. It is one of the standing pillars of this novel. Stoker loves science. He just had the order correct. Creation, then science. And last, and I mean it when I say least. So this last piece is full of conjecture, but I am curious. So true or false, would you prefer a world full of God-fearing Christians or a world full of secular humanists? You cannot have both, one or the other, no portion of either. It's a sold-out one or the other. Let me ask you again to think about it hypothetically. Given a choice, which world would you prefer to live? If you had a choice between the two, a world consisting of only truly God-fearing Christians who couldn't change versus a world full of truly secular atheists who couldn't change, which would you choose? The devil is secular atheism. A world without God, it pleases the devil. The devil is meddling in the world's affairs. When we fail to acknowledge the Lord, it is a steep, steep slope. The secular world would become a dangerous world, would it not? As the secular mind won't yield to absolutes. It decides to make up the rules on the fly. In a completely humanistic, atheist worldview, there will be no rules to govern. The rules are defined by force. Whoever is strongest, mightiest, wealthiest decides the rule of the day. Remember, all this is hypothetical. There is no Judeo-Christian law. It would have never existed. There is no guiding authority, no Bible, no rulebook, no absolute anything. Friends, in Stoker's world there is supernatural, there is evil, and there is a cure. Christ's body shed for us. It brings me comfort knowing God put this book on Stoker's heart. Okay, that's enough, friends. If you haven't already considered subscribing to RevKevHumanMe, ring the bell so you never miss my videos or interview. I promise, friends, we're just getting started. And please feel free to share this episode, and whatever comes back, the feedback that comes our way, I'll take responsibility. Again, love to hear from you. Provide your comments below, and peace be with you. Have a good day.
Now is the best time to start.
Not tomorrow. Not next week.
Not until next month.
Not next year.
You have to start
Right now.
Get out there and chase your dreams. Find adventure. Fall in love. Take risks.
Because trust me,
It'll be worth it, I promise.